Okay. Welcome to this evening lecture event. It's far more than a lecture, it really is an event, as we are welcoming 3 lecturers tonight. We're inviting Ed Keller from New York, Tapio Snellman from Neutral, London, and Hernan Diaz Alonso from Los Angeles. This lecture event is part of a 3-stage communication project that gave us the experience to view the guests in different positions. One as critics, part of the DRL jury, then as teachers, communication workshop, the 3-day crash workshop that we just finished a few hours ago, actually less than an hour ago. And finally, as lecturers, giving us their insight right into their very core of their practice. There are already a number of reflections that emerged from this exposure, from this experience over this couple of days with new digital media. And if I just touch on 1 or 2, as we are going to extend in far, far more depth with the work and exposure of our guests, as mentioning maybe the emergence and collapse of disciplines into possibly a singular or far more condensed form of expression, and the shift from possibly additive linear practice to multiple, transformative, and far more complex generative processes of what form and define new topological production or the critique thereof. Now, I'm going to stop here in adding reflections that I think we want to, at the end of the 3 lectures that will last approximately 30-35 minutes each, possibly engage a conversation that might, and I shall invite the various members of the community that experienced the critiques or the workshop to kind of engage a conversation that might sort of be reflective on this communication workshop or program. I should also mention that the work that's being produced during these 3 days really is extraordinary, and we shall engage a form of continuity. One, we're planning an exhibition of the work, however small, but present in LA, and later on during the year in April here at the AA. Well, let me start off introducing the 3 speakers a little bit in more depth. Ed Keller, that we start off with, the first presentation, known as a writer, an architect, designer, musician, multimedia artist, but also competition climber, as you might be interested to hear, and professor for architecture at Columbia University, taught at Pratt, is also presently teaching at SCI-Arc and Parson in the past. He teaches studio and theory seminars, investigating the very specifics of overlaps between cinema, digital game design, and architecture. Ed is a principal of 2 firms, a.CHRONO Studio, which is a practice for architecture and new media, presently involved with 4 residential projects in Portugal. And the second firm, a.CHRONO, that got founded in '98, that investigates new media and online game design, screenplay, film projects, and the art direction thereof. Ed's work has been exhibited at the Beijing Biennale, and presently just released a very beautiful publication, including 12 studio works of his studio at Columbia from 1990 to 2003, which is compiled in the publication called Chronomorphology. I shall introduce the other 2 speakers, not to interrupt the flow later on. the second speaker being Tapio Snellman. I think Christian Grou we probably just lost along the way. He's packing his bags for LA tomorrow morning to shoot a film documentary on Lufthansa. So we're happy to have Tapio tonight. The two have been collaborating since '98 when they formed a partnership in Tokyo. And their firm started off as an experimental practice, exploiting, again, digital film media, new media, which then also followed with self-commissioned and self-produced films, commercial movies, and interactive digital work. You probably have come across their work on multiple levels. There are animations with Zaha, Herzog de Meuron, Toya Ito have written on our writing history at this very time. Their animations are spectacular, intriguing, and new in the sense of the word. Whoever has seen the ICA Zaha exhibition probably has seen their work, which was mostly documenting Zaha's work. And the third speaker tonight, Hernan Diaz Alonso, is not, as we have got to know him here at the A, not just being very entertaining, inspiring, and sharp critic and teacher. He has developed a very intriguing practice, positioning himself at the very front of ongoing discourse and research of contemporary architecture, or what defines contemporary architecture and the debates on the employment of new media today. He is a permanent faculty member at SCI-Arc in Los Angeles. He is a director of the thesis program at SCI-Arc and also professor at Columbia University, New York. He's principal of his firm, Xerofiotar, in LA, and I'm sorry about the pronunciation, you will do a much better job there, that he founded in 1999. His practice has won multiple international prizes and has been widely exhibited and published. More recently, his work has been seen at the Biennale in Venice this year, and actually just end of last year, and shortlisted as one of the 5 finalists of the PS1 this year's show at the MoCA in New York. He is also part of the Glamour show at the San Francisco MoCA, or MoMA, sorry, and a solo show in the pipe at that same museum at San Francisco MoMA coming up shortly. That will be traveling to Japan, Europe, and around the USA. There's a monograph in the pipe with a French publisher, but I should stop here and really just adding what he actually asked me to mention, that his mother loves his work. So we're going to start off with Ed's presentation, followed by Tapio, then Hernan, and then if we still have the energy, engage a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, and to the AA for bringing us over here. It's been a really intense 4 days, and I don't know if I'm a thoroughbred or one of those, highly tuned nervous racehorses. Probably find out in the next 10 or 15 minutes if my endurance is going to last after those marathon reviews and the workshops. My mom actually is a surrealist symbolist painter, and I look forward to the day when she loves my work. I know she would love Hernan's. Can we bring the light down here at the podium a little bit? I'm going to show you a work from a few years ago, just as a sort of a starter to kick off. This will be about a 4-minute kind of introduction, and then I'm going to give you a more general introduction to some of the themes that we're dealing with in our work today, and show you some projects that we've been working on more recently. The title of this piece is Hypnagogue. This was a collaboration with Perry Hall. Perry is a brilliant abstract expressionist painter and musician. And for many years, he and I had longed to do a collaboration. So between 95 and 2001, we worked together to produce this piece, which was an interactive narrative, something like a CD-ROM game, something like an installation piece. It was shown at IC in '97. We've screened it at a lot of places: SVA, NYU, The Kitchen. There are over 40 of Perry's paintings in this project. A lot of the texture maps you see are his work. We worked collaboratively to design the space, the interaction, the sort of game design. As you see, it's a kind of an older adventure game paradigm, something familiar to you guys from games like Myst, of course, which was a big kind of protocol for us when we first started thinking about this project. We also were very influenced by Tarkovsky's filmmaking. So for us at the time, in 96, 97, 98, we weren't actually so worried about having fast interaction. We were just worried about having high quality sound and graphics.
Sitting in a chair next to a table, gazing eternally into a plane of light, trees and wind around you, but not breaking your stare. You stare transfixed, waiting each moment to go a little further into the aching light, looking for the interior of sight somewhere.
That's just a very quick introduction to the project Hypnagogue, again, that we worked on between about 95 and 2001. I'm going to switch gears here for just a moment. And before I start showing some more work, I want to give a short intro to some themes that we're dealing with in the office right now. We've been trying to make games, making games, obviously proposals for architecture and things influenced by film for some years. Film has really been a very important influence. Recently I've been using the term drift cinema, and this has been triggered by several themes in the research. Hollis Frampton in the early 70s talked about the idea that cinema was actually a last machine, that cinema's ability to entrain global consciousness and merge the newly minted hallucinations of the dream machine with flows of capital and culture was absolutely unprecedented, but it was taking place in the time of the waning of a kind of post-industrial macroscopic system and also post-industrial macroscopic model of time. We could say maybe cinema deserved that title in the 70s because precisely it was one of the last industrial age devices that would have a kind of geopolitical centripetal capability. But today we live in a time where the concept of the machine has been revisioned, and the old distinction between biological and non-organic has been to some extent erased. Of course, we can see evidence of novel properties of awareness and self-organization of material systems if we look at the right scale or take into account different scales of time, centuries or picoseconds. So we could say then that the machine, when considered from a certain point of view, is alive. And we can say then perhaps that there's another revision of that last machine that can take place. When Negri talks about the idea of the common in Empire and Multitude and Alma Venus, the kind of idea he has of the common finds its maximum expressivity in what I'm calling drift cinema. And of course every day this is growing more explicit and more nuanced. Also, this concept of the non-organic expressivity, when you tie it to older forms of information and energy exchange, like the flaneur of the 19th century or Medvedkin's Cinetrain, kind of agitprop filmmaking, Vertov as well, might earn the moniker, the last machine again. So on an urban and cultural scale, this idea of drift cinema, or drift, again, as foreseen by the situationists, constant visionary architectural groups like Superstudio, Archzoom, is simply a way of producing what complexity theory would call a far from equilibrium state. The situationists recognize that the value of drift, the sort of dérive in the city, is precisely to create the random encounter, to open up systems that are previously isolated or closed. I suggest that the terminology I'm dealing with here, drift cinema, has been realized in a kind of embryonic form by many filmmakers. This is the opening clip from Antonioni's film Blow Up. Some AA students and professors, I believe, are riding around on that vehicle, but it's a bit far back in the past. I think it was in 70 or 69. So again, that it's been realized in an embryonic form by a number of architectural theorists, filmmakers, and then in the next decade it's going to expand rapidly to become a kind of probe-like machine through which we examine ourselves. Today, cinemas of alterity are emerging in cultures which currently struggle to accommodate and resist or inflect a kind of a post-capital and postmodern network, looking back in time also to someone who had a history at the AA, Chumi's Manhattan Transcripts, drift cinema, again. Also the gestures, which can invoke a host of spirits today, are no longer confined to individual acts of theater or reduced or controlled by state interests. Today, the long-promised revolutionary capacity of cinema, which would be produced by the person on the street, is finally close to some kind of implementation. And then finally, an observation about drift and time. All characters drift in space, and we talked about this all in the workshop in the past couple of days. But drift is also a time shift practice, whether it takes place today or it takes place in, the kind of mystic, visionary iconography of someone like Jacob Boehme, which you're looking at right now, right? Deleuze is quite instructive here. His notion of the time image, which he develops in his cinema books, is a synesthetic approach to the problems of information flow and energy flow. Also the models of memory and the most basic questions of difference, repetition, and life. And the concept of the time image as invented time, which is what Deleuze talks about when he develops this in Cinema 1 and Cinema 2, if we apply this to drift cinema, yields an image of a system which, in multiple states of time, actively dreams itself. Just like Guido in Fellini's film 8½, it evidences a kind of a larger superstructural aspect of this dreaming. Just like the characters in Jim Jarmusch's film Down by Law are evidences of a kind of invented possibility and an open future. So drift cinema, or drift urbanism and cinema, sets its protagonists free in time as well as in space, whether that means a kind of Proustian recherche of memories unbidden, the noise to signal ratio, or it means that they themselves become constituent parts of a larger political system, which is computing itself possible presents, possible futures, possible pasts even. There are a series of references here, people like Lull and his combinative strategies, which come into play in some of the work we're doing in the office. Scale shifting out to literally the surface of the sun and the kind of morphological variants that we see in solar flares. The energetic questions that come into mind are also issues that concern us in one of the projects. I'll show you the game development project that we're working on currently. Scale shifting to the planet and the intersection between the anthropomorphic and the human, the scale of the Earth itself, and systems which are vastly outside our comprehension. So in this case, the aurora borealis in the form of it. And I start this slideshow off with an image from Grant Morrison's comic, The Invisibles, and this is another image from Grant Morrison's brilliant comic series, The Invisibles. This is, to some degree, the tone that I think drift cinema can adopt. Well, the works I'm going to show you include Hypnagogue. This will be just a couple of high-resolution images of the project, again, which I collaborated on with Perry Hall, the painter and musician. Some competition works, some residential work we have in progress right now, very quickly, research installation, and then the game design project, Ornament, which we're working on in the office and have been so for a while. Hypnagogue, a few sentences about what this was. We wrote about the project. You remember an angel from the stories of your infancy. In this tale, she gathered the outsiders and the deformed from their coffins, made a tribe on an island on the inside of an eye. They made a black sun from sand and paint. They worshipped the enigma of desire. So obviously, with Hypnagogue, we return to a surrealist source. As I mentioned, Perry's a brilliant abstract expressionist painter, heavily influenced by the surrealists as well. We were interested in a synesthetic narrative as a pure experience, as a logic for gaming. When we made Hypnagogue, we asked, does digital media really afford a kind of access to the inherently discontinuous, which would falter alternative modes of perception? Is it a good model for synesthetic nature of perception and being? We were interested in paradox. There is a kind of storyline in this game, but it's very oblique. Paradox, we thought, could become a kind of form and structure itself, and we also thought that memory would be a contact with the future, not with the past necessarily. The mechanisms of beauty and terror are the same, and expose a boundary between the real and the impossible. So one of the projects with Hypnagogue, which was a quite intense project to work on actually, was to go into the unknown and to try to bring back little bits and traces of it. The temporal nature of a paradox indeed challenges all the aspects of how we organize our knowledge of the world. Time-space distinctions, which we conventionally use to figure out where the self ends and the world begins, start to break down, to falter, to stutter, and memory functions again as a understanding of the future. Now, that project we put to rest in 2000-2001. This is a much more recent project. It was an ideas competition, House for Andrei Tarkovsky. Some of you probably even did this competition. Apparently we won it, although it's very hard to tell exactly how that judging process was structured. We did it in our new office, AUM Studio. This is an office I co-founded in 2003 with my partner, Carla Leitão. Carla's a Portuguese architect. We were wondering, with this project, is Tarkovsky the equivalent of a character that Gabriel Garcia Marquez talks about in his novel 100 Years of Solitude, Francisco the Man? He's an immortal storyteller whose bare feet are cracked from walking, saltpeter feet he keeps time with as he sings songs that he learns from people in one village and tells to people in another village. We also were wondering if traveling and dreaming is a kind of a reverse forgetting, what some people have called an anamnesis, a reversal of amnesia. then each voyage can be a reflection of a larger one, a search for a kind of memory, something lost in time so deep that it can never be fully recovered. So Borges's Library of Babel comes to mind. Of course, every book contains all other books. The library is infinite. But in the labyrinths of matter, of being, of language, we chose the concept of the bridge, of the boat, and the road instead of the house for someone like Tarkovsky because, of course, Hugo's quote here, exile is not a material thing, a spiritual thing, seemed to drive Tarkovsky's perception of the world and of his own role in the world. We actually wanted to make a proposal somewhere in between an unrealizable proposal and a realizable proposal. The mesh of the road adjusts according to the crowds that gather, and indeed the yellow walls you see are constructed of beeswax, and they move very, very slowly as crowds gather along this structure. You also notice we populated our house for Tarkovsky with characters from Maya Deren and Wim Wenders films, as well as ourselves, and as well as some more Jacob Boehm references. A much more recent project was the project we did for the Beijing Biennale. This project was titled Time Flow Control. And this is a kind of a launching pad for a much longer kind of research that we're going to be doing in the office. It's starting to inflect some of the house projects we're doing and some of the competition projects that we're doing. This was a pretty speculative project. We used a piece of software called Reactor, made by Native Instruments, which is a digital synthesizer, sound synthesizer. And it has a beautiful open architecture to it, so people have been writing plugins for it, of course. This plugin is called Metaphysical Function. And Metaphysical Function has not only a fantastic sound quality, but also gives you a very beautiful 2D output. Reactor can also accept mathematical functions as inputs. So what we decided to do was try to create a taxonomy of sound forms which we would match to event situations that we chose from cinema, and by extension, architecture. We looked back to René Thom's catastrophe theory to do this. Thom's Structural Stability and Morphogenesis was an extremely important text for people like Quinter and Greg Lynn about 10 or 12 years ago. But nobody's really worked through what René Thom was doing in terms of topology and catastrophe theory. So we're going back to this. In the fall, we're going to be collaborating with a mathematician who's a little bit better equipped to handle some of the rigors of the catastrophe theory than we are, to develop ways of inputting into Reactor what we will correspond in terms of loops, possible futures, closures, or let's say catastrophe within the behavior of a system, and link them up to the behavior of architectural spaces, cinematic spaces, and programs. So for this project, what we did is we went through Reactor and Metaphysical Function, and we spent a few days creating a catalog of different sound typologies and morphologies. We then matched those with architectural spaces and cinematic conditions, and we also matched them with some of the archetypal cusp conditions that Thom talks about. So we looked at one shot from Fellini's 8½, which I'll show you actually the piece that we did in just a moment. We looked at a shot from Vertigo by Hitchcock, and we looked at a shot from, again, Wings of Desire. Each of these shots is a kind of a crucial shot in terms of what it develops in terms of the destiny of the characters and the way that architecture and spatial conditions play a part in the destiny of the characters. So what we're searching for here is an application of these ideas from René Thom to the life of a system. The life of that system can be an individual, it can be a population, or it could be a kind of a program or an urban condition. We're trying to be completely agnostic about the way we consider life of a system. It has to do with, and again, this will be familiar verbiage for the workshop people, what possible futures open up to a body, how you define the limits of that body, and then how you determine its relationships with its context. In this case, it has to do with the sort of psychic configuration and the guilt configuration in Guido, the main character in 8½, when he confesses to visiting a prostitute on the beach. In this case, it has to do with the time travel that takes place for Jimmy Stewart's character, Scotty. This kiss is actually the second major kiss in the film, and he flashes back in this shot to an earlier kiss. If you watch this scene closely, it's quite amazing because he actually looks terrified during the flashback, more than he looks like he's having fun. And this, of course, is the moment where one of the angels, Demille, decides to descend to Earth. Wenders shot this, of course, before the Berlin Wall came down, so this is a kind of a way of citing the geopolitical landing of an information system in matter between the East and the West. Okay. Sorry about this. I'm not getting... Okay, sorry guys. I'm going to have to jump out and start that again. Sorry about that.
La Saraghina è il diavolo.
Non lo sapevo proprio.
This is a remarkable shot because when he enters the confessional, it's positioned in space in one orientation. As you see now, when he comes out of the confessional, it's positioned in a completely different configuration. That kind of spatial derangement is not only a kind of a semiotic condition which lets us know that Guido has gone through a transformation, but it's also connected to the kind of time loop conditions that we're interested in this kind of analysis. So again, when we're talking about time flow management, we're interested in a kind of way of evaluating time in terms of a body's ability to sustain itself, according to the time of the kind of morphology of repetition and difference at any given scale of reference modeled as this sound form and a waveform. We're also interested in time in terms of its possible external relationships, the destinies and histories, the future memories, past memories that a body has access to. In this sense, we're interested in understanding how any system has the ability to know itself. So time, once again, comes into play in terms of the kinds of awareness that a system can gain access to. This does connect back in a very interesting way to Deleuze's theories of time and memory in Cinema 1 and Cinema 2 as well, because he goes through three orders of memory: the automatic, the attentive, and the inventive memory. And his notion of a synesthetic time, sound, image is actually the inventive form of memory. So again, this project is a kind of a first step towards a combinative methodology so that we can crossbreed seeds, seeds of programs, seeds of organization, seeds of different kinds of memory and stability. And later this year, we're going to be using this process in an installation that we're doing, I believe, at SciArc. Now, some of the ideas that we're talking about in the Beijing project come to earth in one project I'll show you in a little bit of detail here in Portugal, one of the houses we're doing in Portugal, and also come to bear on one of the competitions we've done recently. We've been looking for ways that we can incorporate some of these ideas, which are in between modeling, simulation, and representation, into a design process that yields a kind of a responsiveness in the project which isn't necessarily mimetic with the diagrams. It doesn't necessarily adopt exactly the morphology of the diagrams. So this is a project in the north of Portugal. It's about 2.5 hours north of Lisbon. It's a small site on the edge of a village. It's a house for a single family. And we're interested in a reconfigurable space in this project. Again, I mentioned earlier, this is going to probably look more like it has a kinship with someone like Neutra than it does with some of the diagrams that we've been doing. The house can reconfigure. The entire interior skin of it is a furniture that moves. And It follows a fairly standard open floor plan, but of course all of these components are movable, so the house can become a loft typology, or it can become subdivided into several bedrooms and a living room and so forth. What we've been doing is we've been taking the first stage of design, which of course was submitted to City Hall, and we're post-analyzing it to try to understand what we can do with material treatments and skin treatments in the project. So we're looking for intensities of flow, light, circulation, program in the project, and modeling those in a number of different ways in Maya and in Illustrator. What we're trying to do is understand how we can take the generic proposal that we've made, which seems to be passing the City Hall, and tune it in terms of material specificity. So the outside envelope of the building probably won't change very much, but the skin of the building in terms of light regulation, in terms of materials, in terms of the kind of screen conditions that we're going to be using as an exterior brise soleil will change. The treatment of the floor and the roof will change in terms of light permeability. We may modify the circulation according to some of these studies, or we may keep it at a kind of a material level. So again, these are flow studies that we did in the office in Maya, looking at ways that we can establish continuity from one zone in the house to another. And right now what we're doing is we're looking for ways to imply this in the matter of the building and the form of the building. I'm going to very briefly go through another project that we're doing in Portugal. I'm not going to show you much of this project at all, just a kind of a teaser. Beautiful site, Cabo da Roca, westernmost point in Europe. There's our project. There's the lighthouse. This is a nature preserve, township of Azoia. Took various site forces to integrate onto the site. There's a pretty serious constraint on the site. This red line is the middle of the site. So we had to deal with the entire site, but only build on this zone, because on the west side of that zone it's a nature preserve. So we're looking for ways to aerate the building, respond to a general typology, and we're going through exactly the same process with this project as well. This one was just submitted for approval also a couple of weeks ago. And what we're going to be doing is taking this plan and design that we've developed for the project and applying the same set of post-evaluations to it, because as you see here, we haven't really skinned it. All of these zones facing south and west are going to be skinned with brise soleil. So the way that we're going to tune this project will be a little bit in terms of the morphology of the building, quite a bit in terms of the material condition, skin condition, light control of the building. This is a competition which we are also doing in AUM Studio. It's still in jury, so I'm not going to really talk too much about this one, but I'm going to show, again, a couple of bits from it as a kind of a provocation. We're interested in aggregation and blending and translation of global flow to local conditions. It's a project for a city. We're using some infrastructure in a city. We're interested in field conditions and how we could generate aggregations in those field conditions that could superscale. So the idea of an M-brain coming out of a kind of a recent development in theoretical physics was interesting to us, because dimensions can, within that theory, scale up outside the dimension that they occupy initially. So we wanted to understand how we could aggressively create this scale shifting in the project. Big project, so Les Halles was a kind of a reference point for us. We identified systems which form three types of urban memory at several scales, and they range from the scale of the human up to the global vectors that a large port city would connect with. When we were doing that, we identified these different kinds of conditions on the site: compression, expansion, pressure point, inflection, folding, deflection, collision. And each of these we related to time cycles. So again, some of the ideas that we're talking about in the development of the Beijing project come back here, except instead of being a very abstract thing that's connected to a cinematic field condition, what we're doing is we're dropping this into an urban condition, and we're asking the question, what are the infrastructures of the urban condition which can support these different kinds of buildings of destinies or futures for a system, or minimizations of destinies and futures for a system. The predictability and the unpredictability of the system is key here. We start connecting these again to certain kinds of urban infrastructure. Again, we're interested in a kind of an aggregation. So what we did is we worked with several different kinds of system, and we looked at ways that we could blend between states in a system to generate a kind of a logic for connection programmatically, spatially, and formally between these systems. And again, each of these notions of open, closed, transitional, and undifferentiated connect back to the analysis we were doing of the site. Again, I'm not showing much of this project. I'll leave that image up for a moment. So again, there are three different kinds of urban memory we were concerned with. There's one kind of system which is primarily conservative in that it prepares for a future that's going to look exactly like the present. These are closed loops and very predictable. Second kind would be an urban system which is somewhat innovative in the way it sets up cycles which kind of orbit through a set of possible futures. In the kind of far from equilibrium terminology, it explores a set of phase spaces and phase states. But it usually settles within a given predictable range of outcomes. So if you shift scale up, you can see it migrating, but you know it's going to hit one of 5 or 6 possible futures. These systems have built-in feedback loops in cities, which can either dampen or intensify their behavior, so they make kind of sensitive decisions in terms of what they perceive of outside forces. And the memory forms these systems produce create slow modulations of consciousness and memory. Institutional forms kind of do this. Cultural forms do this. Music, genres of music that emerge in a city do this. And then finally, the third kind of memory would be an urban system which generates a completely unpredictable outcome, an unpredictable outcome that oscillates wildly through a range of possible futures. And this is, of course, the far from equilibrium state. So we were arguing that a kind of a healthy urban fabric would support a gently oscillating and kind of overlapping range of these three different kinds of memory, and that over time it would develop an emergent fourth memory, which would be a kind of self-regulation, or perhaps a kind of total awareness of the other three states. Again, three primary flow controls that we're talking about here. Remember, the Beijing project was about time flow control. This is again about flow control, but it's about flow control within this context, as opposed within a much more theoretical, temporally framed context. Last project I'm going to show you is the game design project that we're still working on in the office. I think I'm about on time here. This, we gave it the working title Ornament and Crime, partly because we really love Los, and partly because the project does have something to do with the thematic that he dealt with. This project is a science fiction project. It's set 22 years in the future. We worked on it as a scenario planning exercise as well as a game design project. We are developing it simultaneously as an online computer game for massive multiplayer deployment, as a comic book, and as a film, a feature-length film. The premise of the project draws its base from the idea of the singularity. Ray Kurzweil talks about this, right? The rapidly accelerating technological change that we're moving towards will reach a peak, and at that peak, in our narrative for the game, we suggest that a demiurgic artificial intelligence may emerge. You've heard this in popular culture through films like Terminator, of course, but we're trying to add a little bit of, let's say, substance to that. So in Ornament, we forecast that this is not only going to radically transform social interactions and cause global political change, but it's also going to breed a range of competing realities. And each of these is spun out as a scenario bias in the game. We looked at many, many films which have complex time structures, and we mapped and cataloged all of the different kinds of time structures, loops, closing downs, open systems, oscillations in those films. We looked at dozens of films. This parallels the kind of work that we do in an academic context when I ask my students to do film analysis. So we picked about 30 of the films that we thought were exemplary, and we went in detail into those. I'm just showing you, the kind of range of films that we were interested in. And then we built out a number of scenarios. Each of these scenarios, again, is a kind of a competing reality. It's not only what we suggest in a very real sense, an academic sense, is a possible reality for us in the future as we hit the singularity. And here I'm not talking about fiction, but I'm talking about my strong opinion of where we're going in the next 2 decades. But it also becomes within the game, each of these scenarios becomes a kind of a set of external rules for gameplay for the player. So each of these sets up the kind of boundaries that they can move within spatially and temporally. It sets up the kind of logic for what they can do as a player within the logic of a kind of a massive multiplayer game. It sets up the kind of leveling rules for them to advance their character in the hierarchy and so forth. And again, one of the key things for us in this project is to give the player the ability to change not only things like what they can do with the tools in the game or where they can go, but also how they can move through time and how they can affect other players' ability to move through time. Now, we haven't developed a game ever like this before, but we've spent a lot of time talking to people who have and interviewing people who have. So we're very, very keenly aware of the technical difficulties of doing something like that. We spent months considering that very problem. We looked at ways that we could build out possible stable futures in the game at points where the 5 scenarios overlap with each other. And as you branch out from those stable conditions, you come into spaces where, again, in the terminology from Far From Equilibrium conversations, you can't predict what will happen to a player. Again, in terms of the game typology, we're combining role-playing environment where social structures form and evolve among players with a first-person kind of action game, which is based mostly on non-violent gameplay. And again, importantly, the players have this ability to interact with literally the fabric of time. When we were working on this project, we were developing it in my office at a.CHRONO. We also collaborated for a few months with Katie Lab in New York. I'm sure some of you have seen their work. I don't know if they still exist, but when we were working with them 2 years ago, it was Joseph Kaczynski and Dean DeSimone. I would imagine their website is still up. So when we were doing a trailer for fundraising purposes, which I'll show you right now, the renderings were produced with Dean and Joe. And our design team designed all of this. Oh, before I show you the trailer, this is a quick excerpt from the storyboards we're doing for the comic. We scripted out a feature-length screenplay, and we did a treatment for a full-length graphic novel, 400-page graphic novel, and we storyboarded a bit of it by hand and did a little bit of concept art also digitally. I'm not telling you what some of these things are simply because I really shouldn't be talking about the core of the storyline, to be honest.
The sun has fallen down. Billboards are all leering, and the flags are all dead at the top of their poles. It went like this. The buildings toppled in on themselves. Mothers clutching babies picked through the rubble and pulled out their hair. The skyline was beautiful on fire. All twisted metal stretching upwards. Everything washed in a thin orange haze.
just to conclude, I want to speak about a key concept that comes from ornament that Juan Azulay and I have been working on. Juan is an architect in Los Angeles. We've taught a bunch of studios together at Columbia, and he also collaborated with us on this project on ornament. This term is geological drift, and of course drift comes back in again, right? Drift is this key concept. Geological drift is a kind of situation where the free play of intensities that people like Constant envisioned in New Babylon becomes activated and responsive to a general economy on a global level, a tectonic level. High tech, because we're thinking about the computer game, distributed through, in fact, possibly smart mobs. It was something that we didn't take on when we first started the game development in 2000, but it became apparent that we would have to address it as we moved forward. Coming from George Bataille's sense of a general economy, we're interested in how these kinds of geological drift can become unexpected transitive relationships between a cultural event and innovation in manufacturing technology, in infrastructure, and kind of an economy. So we're hypothesizing that this global drift, and again, we try to use these images without too much nostalgia. Global drift is both a result of and a catalyst for a new kind of intelligence. Explains the emergence of new freedoms, new restraints on freedom, triggers flows across national, economic, ethnic, cultural, religious, materially intelligent regimes. So with ornament, we really wanted to ask what play would be in a near future where the boundaries between the virtual game, the urban game, the computer game, cinema, and architecture have all been kind of confused, blurred, and erased. And of course, we can't stop looking at these kinds of flows. In fact, all of ornament is about this kind of stuff. The whole game narrative is driven by those kinds of questions. So once again, as designers, our job is not the crystallization of social relationships, which then would just unpack themselves like programs and replay as pure expression, but it would be the catalyzing of possible forms of freedom in matter. But the question would be, what kind of freedom? Thanks. Is it still? Thanks a lot.
No, it's fine. So? Absolutely. So thank you for having me here. My talk is going to be short, and I was only told about 3 hours ago that I was the one to give this lecture, so I'm not fully prepared. Christian, my partner, you say unable to be here today, and he is usually the talker. This 3-day seminar has been a kind of academic stopover for us from quite a decadent corporate job for German airline Lufthansa to basically spend 2 months filming the world. And it's a very, very unlikely turn for us, because filming was more like a sort of private obsession and luxury, to go to places, to film, to try to get into moods and situations, and to actually, and we never had any commercial aspirations in doing this series of films we have been working on for the past 5 years. And but when we were invited to do a pitch for Lufthansa to rebrand and redesign their in-flight magazine, as they call it, video magazine, which is like an internal TV channel, we were delighted, but didn't have any hopes of getting the job. We're competing against 17 big German advertising agencies, and we are not an advertising agency at all. But apparently our proposal was the most convincing one. So this is just arbitrary footage we have been shooting in the past few weeks, and continuing the journey tomorrow morning. Just a second. I apologize for showing stuff which some of the students might have already seen, but to show some of the kind of work we've been doing, self-commissioned work. What I'm going to show is a collection of films. 2 films, one filmed in Tokyo, the other one in Bombay and London. this work initially derived from a very personal need to express some of the ideas, some of the feelings, and also some of the frustration we experienced when living and working in Tokyo. Me working as an architect, Christian working as a graphic designer and finishing his master's. And it also derives from a kind of personal process of trying to find a kind of home, a place to call home, which we share. And a very different kind of project I would like to show to you is it's not about dealing with existing reality, but rather trying to capture someone's imagination and trying to create spaces from stories heard from someone. And this is a work we did with the fashion designer Hussein Chalayan on a project called Place to Passage. This is a 3D simulation of installation, video installation of initially 6 screens. So it's an art commission sponsored by Formula One, where the idea was to do anything with speed. Really, it's a series of commissions, and our task was to make something which was actually a collection of spatial feelings or almost dreams, and make them into a reality. It's a kind of a journey of a physical journey, but also a mental journey, relating to Hussein Chalayan's personal understanding of his identity. So, in a banal way, it's a journey from London to Istanbul, which he calls home. But through this film work we've been sort of more and more dragged back towards this field. And the most striking example is probably our cooperation with Herzog and Demeron architects on a competition to build a new football stadium in Munich for the next World Cup. And we had done quite a lot of visualizations and been involved in different kinds of work, but this was the first time an architect actually said they want us to do the competition with them as part of the team from day zero. And initially we thought maybe they ask us because they don't think they would ever win the competition anyway. But it was also proved to ourselves that this exploration into film, moving image and animation, that through this process we have gained a kind of insight into things which can affect architecture as well. And I just show you the competition video. Building is actually almost completed now. Where is it? Alright, it's here. In animation, they're all architects working in Basel for Herzog and Demeron, duplicated about 66,000 times to fill up the space. Another project which, in a twisted way, is connected to that one is a very recent one. Zaha Hadid, she commissioned us to do an animation for a competition to design a concert hall in Basel, which is the hometown of Herzog and Demeron. And the competition was shortlisted against Herzog and Demeron and Moog and Degeler, the main two Basel rivals. Our intention was to, or my feeling was that the only way for Zaha to have any chances in getting this kind of job was to seem to know more about the city than people in Basel themselves, and to seem to love it even more than anyone in Basel would. And when Zaha saw the first preview, she was quite disgusted. She thought like she doesn't want to have this kind of I can't remember how she put it. I think she called it a Western movie. I think she meant she was felt it was like a computer game set in Basel, but that's exactly what we intended. And although she kind of hoped that we would not do it and do it differently, make it much more abstract as we usually have been doing her animations, we felt that this time it was really the right decision to really experiment with full-on mapped environments, and surprise, surprise, she won the competition, and now we are accused of manipulating the Basel architectural scene. So, the kitschiest animation we ever produced, but I thought you'd enjoy it. Thank you. I said it was too short.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Well, the very end, but nevertheless. Yeah, that's one. Okay, it's getting late. Everybody's getting tired, especially me. So I'm gonna try to go as fast as I can so we can go all and have a drink and all the things these people need to eat. Some of you saw this lecture months ago in LA. Nothing that big happened in my life in the last month, so it's pretty much the same one, but much faster. So if you thought through that pain, apologize, and you're going to have to sit again. It's going to look bad if you walk away now. So I would like to thank, of course, the AA, the DRL, and especially Jean-Michel for inviting me to be here. It has been fantastic. So let's get down to business. After seeing such an amazing demonstration of skills doing movies from my two colleagues, when I was a kid in Argentina, we used to have cartoons in between movies. In this case, I'm going to show you the cartoons at the end. Nevertheless, let me introduce you to my hero, Wile E. Coyote, which I happen to think he is like the ultimate desert planner and architect. And I think he represents what we try to do, which is planning very careful, draw everything, and fail miserably. But we keep trying. So what I would like to show you tonight is a series of cute and lovely series of failures. These are the things that interest me about the work in cartoon, which is this ability to create like a parallel world. A lot of my work have to do with that nature. And what I want to do is first to walk you very fast through the evolution of the series of ideas that has been driving my work. The work is, of course, driven by technique, and in relation with the technique, with the conditions of aesthetics, and with the condition of where I used to think for a while the problem of beauty and ugliness as a classical problem, but also with the idea of expertise with the disciplinary field. In that sense, the work of Bacon for me always has been extremely important in the sense that he never operates from outside the discipline, he always operates with inside, but keep twisting through the ability to produce a technique. At the same time, that starts to produce like a whole series of byproducts of a new emerging aesthetic that is not related that much based on ideas, but much more based on how the things get done. The other element which is extremely important is the manipulation of the geometry that control the form. And I will make a clear distinction between form and shape. I'm interested in form, I'm not that interested in shape. The construction of form comes through the ability of how you transfer information from one state to the other. Another big influence in my career and my life was the work of Enrique Miralles. This is a very silly essay that he did. I always find it extremely fascinating, which is how to lay out the croissant, which is basically how you transfer a non-standard state of things into a series of conventions. Now, in the last 10 or 12 years, this is my very old work when still we were using computers, something that we built, just to prove that we built sometime down the road. In the last 10 or 12 years, there has been a series of critical shifts within the discipline, if still we can talk about what we used to understand as a discipline. Still, the discipline, I think, keeps changing and evolving, but there is certain territories. And I think 3 or 4 of those critical shifts has been, one, the model of representation into the model of simulation. The other one is the model of typology into the model of topology. Those first 2 are the ones that drive my work mostly. The third one, I would call it a model of collage of organization into a model of pixelation. That is a more accurate. And the fourth one is the one I will talk in the second half, in the last 10 minutes, which have to do with a series of byproduct of this effect of the technique. Now, the other driving force in the work has to do with a cinematic ambition, but not in the terms to produce films, but to start to produce an architecture that behaves in a cinematic way. Why we're using these cinematic tools, the tools that we use in the office and the research in the practice in the school is all borrowed from film industry and another disciplines that operate in a much more dynamic way. Now, if you think in the first, the Matrix was a very fascinating model in the sense of how they combine mechanics with digital, with a whole series of transformations that it produced, in my opinion, a much more complex series of configurations that, let's say, the last 2 or 3. But at the same time, that offers a series of limitations. So this series of limitations is something that it was very evident in the work that we were producing in the office like 3 years and a half, 4 years ago, when still everything was based in the problem of surface, which was like the first, I will say, the first series of byproduct of explorations of this kind of topological argument, this continuous surface, they're trying to do everything. I'm not going to explain you any of the projects. It's much more about how the things operate in terms of how they move into one project or another. There was a competition that we did for Aalborg in Denmark. It was the only relevant thing. It was a series of self-intersecting surfaces that would start to codify the space. That methodology keep evolving into another competition. The other thing, which is I think is important in terms of the way that I operate within the office, is that we always work in 4 or 5 projects at the same time in different scales. So they operate much more like a series of families that mutate into one to another. And that starts to trigger a whole series of conditions about mutations into a species that at that time it wasn't that present. That time was much more about to master a series of techniques and to move from methodology into technique. So this is another competition that we did for Japan, that of course we didn't win. So the thing keep evolving. So at some level, the whole problem of technique is like when you're in a circus, right? You learn how to do 2 digits, 3, 4, 5, and you keep going. So this project is about 3 different pieces with 3 self-intersections. It's still quite silly. We didn't win, but we got the cover of Architectural Record, which is not that bad. Which, by the way, they got so many letters from the other people pissed off that they put somebody like us in the cover. In parallel to those projects, we will start to develop what I will say the truly first projects and deal with the problem of topology in terms of mutation and how to really start to embrace the possibilities of incremental variations and mutation with singular units. There was a project that we did for the Transit Authority in New York to create the prototype for a series of bus shelters. So the idea will be that you take the bus and you go from one street and 100 blocks down there, and you can see the whole sequence of the animation, like those old books, and you flip, and you will see the little guy flipping around. That was the first one that we start to look more carefully in terms of how the thing can get fabricated and so on, but it still was about the singular entity trying to do everything. Stereolithography. At the same time, we were hired by one of the product directors of Capellini, which he got fired. I hope it wasn't because of us. But I have the suspicion that yes. But in any case, the idea was to produce a series of tableware that we call mutant manners. And the idea was, in that sense, again, a singular surface that would create like a topographical level in every table, and we'll be able to break it apart. But this was the first one that started to relate with the problem with the part and the whole, which is another interesting issue that influenced me a lot. That comes from a whole series of conversations through time with Jeff Kipnis with the problem of affect and how the affect is highly choreographed and how the distinction between ambience, atmosphere, and affects operate. I'll go back to that with other projects. This was the plate, you can have the 3 main courses and vertical French fries, napkin holder, flower holder, cell phone for blind people that the surface will be codified, which was a pretty stupid idea because voice recognition can take care of it. But in any case, of course, this line of products, they are not meant to be functional. They're meant to look cool. So they can charge a lot. So honestly, we never got to prototype yet. So this one, so I don't have a clue if they work or not. But they look quite hot for 2000. Ice racks. This was a music pod that we were developing for with Benjamin Bratton for Philips in Germany, that it will places in public spaces, and when you walk, it will activate. Of course, Steve Jobs came with a much better idea, and it never happened. At the same time, the New York Times put together a team. This was before the competition for the World Trade Center, with all the sacred dinosaurs, Pierre, Saha, Rem, the usual suspects. And this was after I worked for Peter Eisman, and he asked me if we can collaborate to help him to develop these projects, and certainly we did, but the idea was give us something for ourselves. So we get this little tiny restaurant there, which it became like a nice game, like a dialogue in history with the Seagram building, which I miss, Philip Johnson, Peter Eisman, myself, without being 98 and dead. But of course because we spent all the time doing the thing for Peter, we only had one afternoon to put together a restaurant. So basically what we did is we took 4 bus shelters, throw it there, and said, boom, we have a restaurant. This, which started like a joke, actually became like a very serious moment, because that's when I really started to explore if we can codify it and really start to operate in a much more instrumental way. This topological model can start to generate a whole series of species that can collaborate and mutate and control the fabrication and control the manipulation of the form in a much more efficient way. Stereolithography of it. The last project of this period, and I'm going very fast, is an installation that it was meant to be in the artist space in New York. This was before the .com crash, so we lost the sponsor. So the project never get done in the artist space, but Sayar asked to build it in the gallery there in 2001. So this was the first project that we really start to work consciously on the condition of dynamics and particles as a way to generate and orchestrate families of form. So the proposal was at that time, very ambitious, to create a whole series of surfaces, a big surface that will be decodified into multiple pipes. Each of them will be bent, and it will have a double plastic skin with flowers inside. So the copper tubes will deteriorate with time the same way with the flowers. So this will become some kind of synthetic nature creature that will trace time. So this is the version at the end we ended up building in SciArc. With the whole series of studies that you have to do to convince people, like interactivity path, areas, flows, all those trendy words that you need to say to sound contemporary. We did a series of models, but what was interesting about this, it really puts us in the position to start to figure out how you start to operate with the territory, start to move from the pure digital domain, and start to interact with the rules of physical presence. So at the same time, the budget was way tighter than it was supposed to be in artist space, so we need to figure out how to design the tool. So the project became a very interesting challenge in terms of how we can start to build a bridge between the 19th century and the 21st century. So design with 21st century technology, but build with 19th century technology, and so on. So we did all these drawings. Actually, I didn't do any of them, but the 2 guys I did left the office after that. There were 155 of these. They spent 2 months doing this for a ceiling installation. So we had to fabricate the tools. And one of the interesting things is when you teach in institutions like SciArc and Columbia, is allow you a lot of interactivity between your own practice and the research that you conduct there. So the way that I operate my practice is like you have like 3 legs. One is the pure design competition, sometimes clients, sometimes different kind of projects. Research through installations, and we get a lot of exhibitions that allows us to test some of these things that would evolve into more complex models of organization. The third one, which started to become for me fairly more interesting through teaching, is start to anticipate what are the possible futures that we can go. So at the same time, so we produce this in the Warner Brothers Stage Design Center. This is a picture of the installation. It really doesn't matter. Let's jump. Let's go to the pictures of the thing. It's kind of boring. So this was the panel that we fabricate, and this was the final piece. It was quite interesting because it became it will only touch 2 points. So when you touch it, the whole thing vibrate. And it was pretty stable, but they forced us to put a couple of cables because they were concerned that they fall down on somebody's head. So anyway, this was the piece. It was fairly big. Now the problem is, we spent a lot of that time working a fairly a small project, the bus shelter, the Capellini collection, the installation in Sayre. So when I decided to start to do competition for bigger projects again, the problem started more complicated because you have more variables, you have more units, and you need to negotiate. So that's when the whole experiment with the restaurant for the New York Times became very handy, because that opened the possibility to start to do like a much more conscious kind of work in terms of how the logic of topology, and start to operate, I would say, in a kind of a more genetic way through cells, to manipulation of cells. Of course, still the work is always our form. Program is not, I don't care about program, but it's not that we don't solve it. It's like it's never a driving force. Being educated in Argentina for 6 years, I spent 6 years doing plans and program. I feel pretty confident that we can do that, but it never interests me as a driving force. I've always been much more interested in the problem, the autonomy of the force, the autonomy of the form as a way to drive and start to produce an affect condition that is not relating with the ambience problem, like a neutral space, and start to be much more interactive. So the difference, going back to the problem of ambience, atmosphere, and interference, ambience, interferences, atmospheres, and affect is highly choreographed and orchestrated. So the most classic example is in Psycho, when Alfred Hitchcock probably was editing in the room, the famous scene of the twing, twing. He can anticipate the reaction of the whole audience. That is an emerging affect that comes out of the effects. So we operate through the effects, but what we hope is to orchestrate a series of affects. Of course, like every architect is interested in form, this is a very authoritarian form to operate. Because the truth is, these things look fluid, but a neutral space, a box, is way more fluid. So fluidity and flows and all those things doesn't interest me neither. So this was the first one that we did based in this principle of topological transformation of singular cells. This is the Grand Egyptian Museum, programmatic organization, all the things that you have to do to show that you care. These are the things that we care. And so there's certain kind of elegant decadence that and reivindicate certain playful attitude to the role of being an architect. I think we never get paid that well, but we get to have fun until you're very old. So that, I think, is a benefit. I think you have this kind of immature attitude that I think can be codified into something really interesting in your own thing. So we have those words, so we can be included in contemporary books. This was the first project also that we collaborate with OVR PLA. We have worked with amazing couple of young engineers that they like a lot to work with us. We didn't test if the structure works. They seem to be confident. So after that, the work started to become highly specific, and I decided to embrace the cinematic condition of production of the form in a much more strong way. So we start to use animations and dynamics, not really to present the projects anymore, but to really start to orchestrate how these families and how these conditions of topological mutations and transformation of singular cells can start to create the families of projects. So all these projects, the San Jose University Art Museum, and the other three that are coming in this series of little films, they are all orchestrated from the same principle. So there is a whole series of variables that start to be changed and articulate to produce them. This one, apparently, we were close. That's what they said. But in this case, there was the manipulation of 5, so the scale was defined by the nature of the volume. So still, this was operating somewhere in between the evolution of the problem of the surface into the problem of genetic cellular manipulation. This is an installation that we've been working for 2 years, and we're going to do, apparently, at the end of this year in San Jose, in Costa Rica, which, again, is the same cell, but it is a transfer of a scale. one of the most interesting things to work with animation software is they have a kind of a nature of being scaleless, if you want. I mean, of course, they have a scale, but you can operate like this territory that the scale start to be defined by other behaviors and not pretty much by the size of things. So that is how the installation will look in the gallery. And this will be done in collaboration with the MIT lab, and all the skin will be synthetic skins. This is another competition that we did at the same time. This is the competition for the U2 Tower in Dublin, Ireland. And Benjamin Bratton, which is a theorist that I collaborate a lot, wrote a really nice essay. We call it this project Arak, which means dragon in Gaelic. And I found an article like a month ago from the Dublin that says that the jury didn't like the project, which means that Dublin is arachnophobic, which I thought sounds quite cool. So in this case, the logic of topology mutates into a structural logic. This is a prototype that we're developing for the Standard Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. It's a gift shop newsstand. And again, it's based on the same principle of transformation. In this case, it became much more like a like a series of panels that would hold and organize all the specific functions that need to hold. And there is a delivery, an absolute deliberate sense of don't make never this kind of render to look like hyper-realistic. We're always going for some kind of a science fiction, artificial behavior. So this was the museum that I showed you, the first one in the animation, the San Jose Museum. This is the location on the campus. This was the whole series of transformation. In this project, each project always tried to contribute with a new element with the transformations of the topology. And in this case was how we can start to attach the wireframe of the organization of the shape to start to become the structure. First floor plan, second floor, section, wall section, budget estimate. This was done with our partners in San Francisco. Not a clue how close it is. The wireframe analysis that start to orchestrate a way how all this process that traditionally was defined in different moments can start to collapse in one condition. So the form manipulation, the geometry, and the structure, and the way that it will be orchestrated can start to operate in the same domain. A series of surface analysis done by OBR to figure out how we can build this structure. This is what we sent. The other thing in this one was we start to develop these guild logics to figure out how we can put windows and perforations and entrance in the surface, interior. This was the shot that apparently lost for us our chances with the President University. So this one. More shots of the project. The installation in Costa Rica, this will be the location. This is some of the tests that we're doing in a 1:5 scale to figure out how we're going to build this panel through CNC milling machines techniques, vacuum forming. The model. The model was fabricated in the same way that the one-to-one piece will be scaled. The U2 tower. Plans. Office space, the recording studio for U2, the section that we were trying to break from the horizontality and try to operate in the vertical condition. Photo montage. This was the one that my mother says she loved my work because it looked like a cat. And that's why I thought, okay, we need to try something new. So surface analysis, all engineering information that try to build some credibility for us, which we didn't succeed in this one. But at least these drawings of the model became part of the permanent collection. This is part of the permanent collection of the San Francisco MoMA, which they're always curators are friends and support to keep going. This is stereolithography model that we did for them. Is approximately 60 inches by 75 inches. The newsstand prototype. As I was saying, each of these panels will codify for the functions. Some of them will hold monitors, magazines, gifts, and so on. some of the panels prototyping that we're doing right now in LA with Spectrum 3D, which is an amazing company that are developing genetic and synthetic materials. So let me switch to the one that I really want to show you. That was fast. Are we doing fine with the time, Jean-Michel? Okay. So, but out of all this project, what started to emerge for me as a critical condition was there was a whole series of aesthetic that was coming out that it wasn't so intentional on some level. I thought there was a problem about searching for beauty and ugliness. But when we did the opening of the show, this show in San Francisco, Glamour, and you see the reaction of the people absolutely horrified, not to only our work, to a bunch of colleagues that belong to the same way to work, I started to ask myself, what was the nature of what we were trying to do? And it occurs to me, and especially because probably I live in LA, that there is a whole new aesthetic that is emerging out of technique and technology that relate to plastic surgery. This kind of, the rules are not anymore based on classical problem. It's not about nature. It's a byproduct emerging of the ability or not the plastic surgeon and how much money you have to spend. And you start to see this grotesque and horrific kind of condition. But at the same time, they have some kind of a sublime problem. So this is right now where I am in terms of exploring the problem of the grotesque and the horrific and the relation with the plastic surgery, which I have to confess is not something that I have completely figured out as a problem. But it seems to me that after the short history of 15 years of exploration in these territories, I think it requires like a second reading about what that means in terms of the value of that problem. And in that sense, I think with the work of someone like Damien Hirst, it can start to relate to the problem of Bacon. So I think there is a kind of possibility for, I think the problem of the horrific and the grotesque is a condition for the sublime. And the condition for sublime is the possibility for certain development of some kind of a soul that can relate with this kind of work, which it seems to be extremely systematic sometimes and extremely dogmatic in terms of where they operate. And this is, of course, is for Terry Gilliam, Brazil. So the first project that let's say, we start to work in a much more conscious way, actually, it was like the remix of a project that we did, this is a competition that we won in Lexington, Kentucky, in the States 4 years ago. The project went totally hopeless in terms of the city didn't have the money to do it or didn't want to do it, whatever was the case. And after this year, this project was last year was selected for the Venice Biennale. I thought that was a good opportunity to reshape some of the old conditions of the project based in the continuous topographical surface into, sorry, it seems to be having a problem with the DVD. Let's try again. To an opportunity to create a whole series of species in terms of the light and the equipment that will relate with a kind of a more conscious of the work. Now the project seems to be back into life, and maybe there's a chance that we end up building it. So we'll see what happens. In the meantime, it became like the Venice Biennale. We had two projects there. Became like an interesting territory to set the parameters for where the work can go and where the work can evolve from here. So this is the new version that we did for the park. And again, this was about fully embracing how we can use animation, cinematics, and the dynamic to start to generate the form, but not in the way that you produce multiple frames and then you pick one. In a way that the form can start to accumulate the topological information and construct them and start to produce recombination. It's almost the aspiration that kind of a self, to start to script and organize the particles in a much clever way is start to give the project like a self-behavior or a self-conscious in terms of how it can start to operate. So these are the new families of lights that we decide to put on top the park. And we're going to build one of these as a prototype for an exhibition in Washington, which is going to be funded by the city of Lexington. So if we do a decent job, maybe we build the project. We won this competition because we did a whole speculation about flower transformations. at that time. And it happens that the flower is like the state flower of Kentucky, which I didn't have a clue. I didn't even know where Lexington were when we did the competition. But when they asked me, I said, of course. So sometimes luck and ignorance work in your favor. Okay, this doesn't seem to be. Okay, let's. Whoa. What the hell is that? Let me kill that, and we keep going. Okay. Okay, there we go. So we were in the park. So let's just show me this. Let me show you the still. This was the whole original transformation on top, the new transformation below. This is the park, the topographical plan. We are working with golf course designers instead of landscape. They have way more sophisticated technology to achieve this complicated topography. That was the original proposal. This is the actual proposal. All these kind of storyboards emerging out of the film to start to produce the project. Different shot, put people, so it seems like you care about what they think. The model. This was, I'm going to go very fast through this one. This was invited competition for the cafeteria and Sire that we didn't win. But again, it's how to show the limits and the possibilities of the behavior of the topology to start to generate like multiple scales. This was the proposal for the cafeteria and the board. In this case, the topology mutates as a way to organize the wireframe and the structure. Then we hold the skins, the plans and the ceiling plan, first floor, more variations of that plan, longitudinal section, transversal section, different shot, the model, the furniture, how we will fabricate the pieces. This is a series of a chain of cigar stores that we're doing in Argentina and Brazil. It's similar principles to the cafeteria. Again, the same unit, the same self mutating. All these projects are happening in parallel. This was the first version. This is the current version. We switched from red to yellow. I mean, smoking gave your teeth became yellow and so on. We have some problems still. We have to change this because those things look like Ku Klux Klan members, so it's not going to look good in the American magazines, and so we have to adjust that. The humidor wall, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's part of the same process. This is a work that the project that we have currently under construction are the Office for Spectrum 3D, our prototyping company. It's a small interior operation, but this is it's going to be done by May. So this is exactly how it looks here, for good and for bad. So it's a whole new composite material that's going to come out of the model, out of the mold. So we have right now, that's the display area. That was the basic one. This is what we're developing now. This is a reception desk. This is the one that we're building right now. It's an interesting project because it doesn't have a budget because they fabricate the pieces. This is a conference table that requires an engineer. There are two pieces that you take it apart, they fall down. But the client is extraordinary, and we are looking to do a couple of more projects with them. They are experimental as we like to think our work is. So they are developing a whole series of new materials. So different drawings, workstations, displays, conference room. This is a project that it's a prototype of a project that we are developing right now for Oakley. I don't know if we'll go into production or not. Right now it's just a prototype, and it's for the American design part of it then, which we have a whole series of internal politics. It seems to have a problem with the DVD that I cannot take it out. I don't know if there is any way to... It's not working. Because I need to show you another DVD, which is the one I will finish. The watch is some kind of futuristic prototype. So it's based on the old sun clocks that you flip around on the part. So the particle will reconfigure the numbers and so on, and the surface will be encoding. That green thing is a mood sensor. So you're in a bad mood, the time will go fast. If you are in a good mood, the time will go slower. So you're making love to a beautiful girl, it will feel like 2 hours, even though it was 5 minutes. So that's what we're working right now. We'll see what happens. That watch was done in parallel to this other project, which was a concert hall, and with the just let me go through the renders of the watch. With the concert hall that we developed for the Venice Biennale, the concert hall was part of a master plan in Busan, and we won the 4th prize. That means 4, no, not first, 4. And so we developed the concert hall, which is in the middle of the bay, in the middle of the water, for the Venice Biennale, for the concert hall pavilions. So the master plan have all series of tactics and so on. The part of the beach will have sports areas. The part on this huge highway bridge will have a series of ferry terminals. But again, it's to start to test the possibility how this topological behavior can jump from a watch to a master plan to a concert hall. This is a couple of touristic attractions on the tower. Can I borrow your computer to show the DVD at the end? Because if not, we're going to be in problems. So you have a hotel based on units, and that's the concert hall that originally was in the master plan. So we decided to develop the concert hall with more, and the concert hall became the laboratory for the new series of families of projects that we're working right now. We're going to keep working in the next year and a half. So this was it's a huge project in the middle of the bay. So this was what we submit for the Venice Biennale, which is also based in the same unit that I was talking before, but now much more scripted and much more articulate through the particles to generate these horrific and grotesque aesthetics. The whole project starts from the balcony. When I show you the DVD, it will be much more evident. It's supposed to be before this, but shit happens. So these are the parts, the interior of the auditorium, a whole series of storyboards that come as a product of the different structures. Another view, the structure that OVR developed for us, series of wireframe, the first floor, the second floor, a longitudinal section. But again, the whole idea was to try to create like a much more like a territory of science fiction conditions that it doesn't have like a clear series of definitions in the traditional sense, even though it remains all the time this negotiation in terms of how operate as architecture, not as creatures. The interior, the pieces of stereolithography, there were 72 pieces to build the model. Instead to do a platform that will be the water, we designed to do like a generic code of all the topological conditions, how the project was evolving. The balconies, which was the origin of the project. More pieces of it. And this is the final model. And that these belong now to the FRAC collection. So this was how it looks in the Venice Biennale. So if these are all the still frames from the animation, and if I can switch computer for just a second, I will show you to you. I don't know what happened with this damn thing. No. Where it goes? Yes. Where is it? Ah, here. That's easy. And it will autoplay.
In the front.
So the movie that we did for this show in Venice, it was a collaboration that we did with Richard Bailey. Richard Bailey is a visual effects supervisor of all David Fincher movies and so on Soderbergh, and now he's working in the new Superman. He's producing the Kryptonite. Yeah. And the idea was, when we start to redevelop the concert hall, was to go back again to a much more extreme condition, to create almost like a short story and transform that in a film that we call it anemone, or anemona, for those of you who speak Spanish. Sorry about the cheesy titles and all that, but when you show it to an exhibition, you have to be sure that they know who you are. So this film show how the scripting and articulation of these cell behaviors of the particles can control the surface and the merging condition in a very precise way. So this is how we start to do the project. We start to redevelop it from the balconies and create the balcony, our DNA code, in which a series of species that will constitute the project will emerge. So in all these forms, all the genetic codes for the rest of the form are embedded. And how from the balcony the thing will keep going, and how it keep propagating, but not as a series of repetition, but as a series of independent units that they have the same topological origin, but start to create a model of organization which is based on collaboration through difference more than incremental variation of repetition. Again, this was a much more conscious operation on the problem of the aesthetic, of the grotesque and the horrific, and this project has become the laboratory for all the ideas that we're working right now. For example, what we're developing for PS1 for MoMA New York is the left part of this. We are taking that as our new genetic system to see how we can produce. The next step that we were developing is this system of Doug Bailey, which is a system of particles, and how would not affect form, but how it will become the form. So let me switch back, and I'll finish right now, so we can all go to dinner. So I would like to think that the nature of the work is not experimental. I would like to think it's research. I think the first series of projects I'll show you were experimental. I think there is a difference between experiments and research. I think there is a tendency to mix them. For me, experimental work is a kind of a one of a kind. It's like you're testing and shooting in multiple directions. I think the second body of work that I show you, I think is a much more conscious and specific and focused research. But all this research has been done. Okay, nothing seems to be working, sorry. Is based on this principle. I have to connect it again. Don't you hate PowerPoint? What this good is very consistent. It always lets you down. Which is based on this principle that I start. Which is this condition that basically what you're trying to do is a series of operations that always are about the same thing. So I always think that this process of discovery is always to go back to your basic ambitions and your basic intent, what really motivates me to keep going. So that's why I always try to reivindicate the notion of playful and enjoy the way that you operate and how the work will have certain irony. Try not to be cynical, but really ironic. And at the end, it's always based on a very simple premise that failure has to be part of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Tapio. Thank you, Hernan. I see a lot of leaving. It's been a marathon session from your juries, the DRL juries, the workshop, and now the three presentations. Nevertheless, since we have the opportunities, since our guests have come a long way from New York, Los Angeles, and it's such an effort to gather us all for tonight, we should take the opportunity, if there's any emergent or urgent questions, to address them to our guests. Are there any questions? Or is the urgency more to sort of reconstitute our physical bodies? So maybe there's no question. So maybe we should close this evening again with many thanks to our guests. Thank you.